This year, I am taking my channel in some new directions. New Directions is a publisher. I'm sure you already knew that. I'm Sarah, and I read books published by independent publishers and university presses and come here on YouTube to talk about them. In 2023, I'm going to be playing some catch up on some fiction published by New Directions that I've been really wanting to read. New Directions is an influential publishing house well known for its focus on experimental writing and writers. It was founded in 1936 by James Laughlin as a place where writers could come and test out new forms and voices and ideas. They actually started in the 1930s publishing anthologies, and eventually New Directions started publishing full novels and plays and poetry collections. The list of authors that New Directions has published is absolutely mind-boggling. For example, New Directions was the publisher that introduced American readers and audiences to the work of Jorge Luis Borges, W.G. Sebald, Pablo Neruda, and Roberto Bolaño, to name just a few. They publish about 30 books a year, focusing on bringing international writers to American audiences, as well as publishing new experimental writing and voices, and also bringing back much well-loved New Directions classics, as well as reissuing other lost classics from around the world. And if you look at the list of authors that New Directions has published, you will see that these really are the geniuses of their generations, publishing important, often challenging, and often very experimental work. Needless to say, I think New Directions is an important stop on this journey into independent publishers. Somewhere along the way, the word experimental, when it comes to books and writing, developed a really serious tone for me. It sounds weighty, like experimental writing, experimental prose. It sounds challenging. It sounds serious. It sounds important. It sounds not particularly fun. But then I think about the way my son uses the word experiment, as in, could I borrow those baking ingredients? I need to do an experiment. Or, could you please fill up the tub? I'm doing an experiment. Or, I need you to roll up the carpets in the hallway and then I need you to leave the room. Don't worry, I'm just doing an experiment. Experiment for him is code for let's make a mess, let's break some rules, let's have some sneaky fun under the guise of learning something about the world. And don't worry, it's in the name of experimentation. In the spirit of a 7-year-old's sense of experimentation, here is my stack of New Directions books. I chose these books in particular to appeal to my sense of play and excitement and joy and experiment. I hope you'll hit the like button if you also want to recapture your 7-year-old self's sense of fun when picking up a new book to read. And in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit more about these books from New Directions. I picked up a lot of these books because they are by authors who are well known or very well known, but who I've actually never read before. First up, we have Memento Mori by Muriel Spark. It is set in 1950s London, and it's about a group of elderly friends who start receiving these anonymous phone calls that all say, remember you are going to die, or remember you must die. And the calls, as you would expect, freak them out, and they start to kind of figure out the story behind why they're receiving these calls and dust off old secrets in the process. It's supposed to be witty and dark, and that's just kind of right up my alley. This was first published in 1959, but was reissued by New Directions in 2000. Then we have The Complete Stories by Clarice Lispector. These are edited by Benjamin Moser and translated from Portuguese by Katrina Dodson. And these stories span Lispector's entire writing career, so nearly 4 decades. Lispector is cited as one of Brazil's most important modern writers and also as one of the world's most important Jewish writers. She moved to Brazil when she was 2 years old, and her family was fleeing anti-Semitism in Ukraine. And she's really well known for her inventiveness of language and introspection, and I'm really looking forward to digging into these stories. New Directions has been republishing in English most, if not all, of her work over the past many years, so you can get quite a many Clarice Lispector books from New Directions, as well as this amazing chunky collection of all her short stories. So then I have 2 books from Helen DeWitt. The first is Some Trick, which is her collection of short stories. These are described as 13 razor-sharp stories. And from the New Directions website, it says, "No author alive today takes a reader as far as Helen DeWitt into the funniest, most far-reaching dimensions of possibility." And this was published in 2018. And then I also have on my reading list The Last Samurai, which was Helen DeWitt's debut novel. It was published in 2000 and then reissued by New Directions. I forget what year it was reissued by New Directions, but it was. And it's about a single mother and her 11-year-old son, who is like an intellectual prodigy, and whose main quest in life is to discover the name of his father. And it's supposed to be like this amazing, incredible masterpiece and celebration of ideas and knowledge and learning. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. Then we have Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls. And if you are unaware of this book, it was first published in 1982, and this edition was reissued by New Directions in 2017. This is the story of Dorothy, who lives a quiet life in the suburbs, and she is at home waiting for her husband to arrive when she hears on the radio a news announcement that a monster has escaped from the Institute of Oceanographic Research, and then things happen. Also on my reading list is Happiness as Such by Natalia Ginzburg. It'll be the first book I've read from Natalia Ginzburg. It was translated from the Italian by Mina Zalman-Proctor, and it was originally published in 1973. And this is a beloved novel, especially in Italy, and it's centers around an absence. So this man named Michel has fled Italy, I believe to England, and he is basically escaping some persecution or some danger that he's in based on his political leanings or the political activities. The novel is in part letters from his family and among his family and friends, complaining about him and begging him to come back, and basically trying to deal with the messes that he's left behind by fleeing Italy. And it's supposed to be funny and sharp and wise and witty, and it sounds great. So then I have The Wall by Marlene Haushofer, and this was originally published in 1963 and reissued by New Directions just this past year in 2022. This was translated by Sean Whiteside from German, and this, I admit, I have already started, and it's amazing. It's about a woman who is vacationing in a friend's hunting lodge in the Austrian Alps. She and her friends arrive one night in late April, and her friends head off to the local village for like a drink or something, and she falls asleep and wakes up and realizes they haven't come back. And as she's venturing out down to the village to figure out where they are, she bumps into an invisible wall, and she realizes this like invisible wall has encircled her, and she is quite possibly the last remaining living person on the planet. So she ends up living there in this hunting lodge and trying to survive on her own with just a cow, a dog, and a cat as her only companions. And it's very allegorical, and it is cited as a feminist masterpiece, and it's really fantastic so far. So then for some books with a bit more recent acclaim, we have Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and this was translated from the Spanish by Sophie Hughes. This is the story of the discovery of a corpse of a witch in a small village in Mexico, and about the investigation into how and why this witch was murdered. But apparently the murder is only the most visible crime at work here. There's something going on that's much deeper and more malignant. I've seen this book around a lot, and I actually had a long while back listened to a really wonderful interview with the author on a podcast called Between the Covers that really made me interested in reading this. It is described in several places as stomach churning and quite violent and horrific. And I do know that the author has another book that has come out recently that has been widely acclaimed. And then also I believe New Directions is publishing another of her books coming up in 2023 as well. So definitely something I'm excited to dive into. And then we have Cold Enough for Snow, which I know has made a lot of people's best of list from 2022. It's by Jessica Au. And this is a story of a mother and daughter traveling to Tokyo. And the novel really is supposed to be quiet and elegant and following them on their walks and visits to restaurants and galleries. From what I've heard, very deeply about our kind of desire to connect with others who are close to us, but complete inability to do so. What I think is really cool about this book is it is the inaugural winner of a prize called the Novel Prize, and it is a collaboration between 3 publishers: Fitzcarraldo Editions, New Directions, and Giramondo in Australia. So 3 publishers, one in the US, one in the UK, and one in Australia. And what they do is they each publisher reads submissions for this prize from their particular regions, and the novel must be originally written in English, and then they come together and they decide who to award the prize to, and it's really supposed to go to a novel that expands our idea of what a novel can be. And so this is the inaugural winner of that novel prize, which is such a cool collaboration. Also on my New Directions reading list is Weasels in the Attic by Hiroko Oyamada, translated from the Japanese by David Boyd, and it consists of 3 interconnected scenes visiting the same characters at different points in their lives, and it takes place in the back room of a pet store, in an old home in the mountains infested with weasels, and during a dinner party during a blizzard. I have to say that this is one of those books where I saw the cover and it immediately stuck with me. It's so bright and striking. It's been something I've been wanting to pick up for a while. And like the author's other works, The Factory and The Hole, also both published by New Directions, it is described as a surreal exploration of often overlooked aspects of contemporary Japanese life. And then my final books here I picked up based on more familiarity with the authors. So first up we have The End of Days by Jenny Erpenbeck, and this is translated from the German by Susan Bernofsky. I had read Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck previously and really loved it. This is a story that follows one particular house in the forest on a beautiful lake over generations and decades in Eastern Germany. It's beautiful and wonderful, and I love it and highly recommend it. From what I understand, The End of Days consists of 5 different books, and each book follows the same unnamed female protagonist, but each describes a different death of that female protagonist. And each one, I think, takes place like during a different decade. And in between each book, I believe there's a narrator who is kind of asking, like, how could this all have gone differently? So very interesting experimental form, much like Visitation, which was also such an interesting form. And finally, we have Annotations by John Keene. And originally I picked this up because John Keene taught at the university where I got my MFA and where I have worked. And he doesn't teach there now, but I just remember everyone wanted to take his classes because he is so brilliant. And I never got to take one of his classes, but I do have this little collection going on of novels and short stories written by writers who worked at the university where I got my MFA. And so I picked up his book anyway, and it has been sitting on my shelves, unfortunately, and I haven't gotten to read it yet. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity, and I know that New Directions has published one, if not more, of his books since this one. This is a good starting point. I'm gonna read this one and then pick up those others by John Keene as well. And this is his first novel. It was published in 1995, and it uses a really experimental style to explore growing up Black in St. Louis, and then also explores various identities from all sorts of different angles. So really excited to read this book from John Keene finally. So there you have it. My New Directions reading list. If you stuck with me to the end, you will notice that all but one of these books are written by women, and that's a pretty standard ratio for me, just heads up. I'll be back periodically with other videos to share more about these books and more about New Directions more generally. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye!